Good morning. It's about time to start this morning. I always love hearing, for lack of a better term, the chatter. I love the fact that we love our church family. We love spending time and talking and catching up. But we can do some more of that after class. Lynn's spent the last couple of years going through the Bible chronologically. He does a great job. The last quarter I've been teaching the college age class, and I hate missing Lynn's class because he does such a good job. But he's at CYC. He asked me to step in today, and I know the place that he's been at generally is First and Second Timothy and Titus, and Lynn kind of said, Chris, I really was at the point I was going to talk about elders. And he said, do you want to do that? And I said, if you do it, they may talk about me. If I do it, maybe they won't talk about me. So yeah, I'll talk about elders today, and that way you won't talk about me. A couple of things very quickly that I feel like I need to say. A lot of what I'm going to say today, this lesson is mine in the sense that I put it together, I put it in my words, but it's been heavily influenced by a lesson I watched a gentleman preach at a congregation in Kentucky a couple of months ago that was specifically about elders. And I would never not want to give somebody credit for some of the things they said. Again, this isn't his lesson word for word, but it certainly has some influence. Additionally, this is Chris teaching a class. This is not Chris speaking on behalf of the elders. So if I say something today that you don't like, don't be mad at Terry and Stacy about it. Talk to me about it. And I'll add one other thing as we get through the lesson and we talk about qualifications, or a term that I like better, qualities of an elder. If I'm standing here talking about that and it goes through your mind, I'm not sure that describes Chris. It may not. You may be right. And there are a lot of things that we talk about that I need to work on and be better about. So don't think that when we go through this today, I guess what I'm saying is that I'm holding myself up that I'm perfect in all these ways. I know I'm not. So it's really interesting. Of course, by and large, our text is going to be 1 Timothy 3, starting in verse 1. Also Titus chapter 1, starting in verse 5, about verse 5 through verse 9. And we're not going to necessarily read those right now. But depending on what version of the Bible you read, you study from. 1 Timothy 3:1 uses the word overseer. In a lot of versions, in the King James Version, it also says the word bishop. Titus uses the term elder. If you go over in Ephesians, Ephesians 4, verse 11, Paul uses the term shepherds. King James Version uses the word pastor there. So I've already come up with 5 different possible titles: overseer, bishop, elder, shepherd, pastor. Depending on what version you read, you could see any of those 3 words. I guess theoretically, I found this in some of the things I was studying, but I couldn't find a specific version of the Bible that said this. You might even also see the term presbyter, but traditionally, we really only use 3 of those words to describe the leaders of our congregation. Historically, in my life, by and large, we used elder, but the last few years, we've started using the term shepherd more, and we've even started using the term overseer some. All of which are okay. But there are 2 words there that we almost never use: bishop and pastor. Why don't we use bishop and pastor? Denominations have particularly used the word pastor in ways that we don't believe are scripturally correct. And Terry, I think you're right. I think we don't use the word pastor, therefore, because we think we could get caught up in the way that that a lot of the denominations use it. And I think really the same thing applies to the term bishop. Because when I say bishop, what do you think of? Think of the Catholic Church. You think of Catholicism. So, while scripturally it would be perfectly fine if the Double Springs Church of Christ called their leaders bishops, practically we don't, because the term means something different to most of the world. And by the same token, we don't use the term pastor. One of the things that I'm going to be using PowerPoint that I don't always do, and it's interesting with this easy worship that we use. I may not be as technologically solid with it as some, but it says in 1 Timothy 3:1 that if anyone aspires the office, aspires. The definition of aspire: to desire or covet, to stretch oneself out in order to touch or grasp something, to reach after or desire something. Well, when I get to looking at this and I get to thinking about this, aspire, you can look at that two different ways. There's a very positive meaning to aspire, and can be a negative meaning to aspire. The good way is, do you have a desire to serve? Again, when we're specifically talking about elders. Do you have a desire to grow God's kingdom? Do you have a desire to help? Bad. Do you desire power? Do you desire authority? Do you desire office? It's interesting, and I didn't know this till I was studying this. Again, there, 1 Timothy 3:1, if anyone aspires to the office of overseer. If you look at the original Greek manuscripts, and I say all the time when I teach, I don't want to get too deep in the woods talking about original Greek and Hebrew, but the word the word office is not in the original Greek. The translators added that. I think sometimes that's one of the things we hang up on. We think of it as an office. You know, and again, before class is over today, assuming we don't run out of time, we're going to talk about the qualities or the qualifications of an elder. By and large, most of the elders that I've known in my life, they didn't want an office. They didn't want a title. They're already involved in doing good works. They're already happy just to serve God. They usually have some humility about them. And I think, again, that's one of the struggles that men have sometimes when they start thinking about being an elder, because you have to weigh that word desire and, again, humility. Well, we have to be careful that the desire is, do you have a desire to serve? Do you have a desire to help? Do you have a desire to follow God's word? You know, I think we put a business connotation too many times on the eldership. They're a board of directors. They're business leaders. I didn't ask Terry this morning. I could have. Stacy's at CYC, so he didn't get to meet with us this morning. But have any of you ever heard at any other congregation or any elders or leaders of the church talk about the vision of the church? Some people want their elders to be visionaries. Again, that's that corporate, that business mindset. Folks, elders don't need to be visionaries. The vision of the church is already set. You don't need to be looking to us to set a 5-year, 10-year plan. The vision's already been set. This is what the vision of a shepherd ought to be. Philippians 2, let this mind be in you which was also in Christ Jesus. We need to have the same mindset as Christ. John 15, we need to remain in Christ. We need to love one another. Ephesians 5, we need to be imitators of God. We need to walk in love. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, follow me as I follow Christ. When we start talking about visions, when we start talking about what we want to do, I hope you appreciate my sentence there or statement at the bottom. We need to choose to do what God is blessing instead of asking God to bless what we're doing. Does that make sense? We get that backwards way too many times. We decide we're going to do something and we ask God to bless it. We just need to do what God's already blessing, what God's already telling us to do. And I think many times, trying to keep this focused on elders, many times when elderships, I wrote down the word fail here, but I don't like that. Maybe when elderships aren't as successful as they should be, it's because they're trying to add man's ideas, man's plans, man's goals. They're trying to connect everything that the world's doing to the church. We, not just elders, we, all of us, we should just be like Christ. We just need to humble ourselves. We need to become servants. We need to put others above ourselves. You know, Jesus is the visionary for the church. I'm going to tell you, if you want or you need a visionary, I'm the wrong person too. That's not my. I'm not an ideas guy. I'm a numbers guy. One of the reasons that I think that the Bible's very clear that we have a plurality of elders. You need people with different backgrounds, different abilities, different thoughts. The main point, the main goal of an elder, of a shepherd, should be to live a life that says, follow me as I follow Christ, just like Paul said. Elders should lead. Most everybody in here has or has had a job or maybe multiple jobs in their career. How many people have ever had a boss? How many people have ever had a leader? You guys understand the difference in a boss and a leader? A boss tells you what you need to go do. A leader does it with you. A leader leads. I was blessed in my life that the first person that I ever worked for, I worked for a lot of neighbors on farms and tobacco and hay and things, but the first job I ever had, the first person I ever worked for was a leader and a mentor. And to this day, there are things that I learned as a 15, 16, 17-year-old that I used and use at work. Elders need to be leaders, not bosses. Come on. So again, what do elders do? Elders lead. They provide the overall direction for the congregation. They make big decisions while delegating others to deacons, to ministers, to just members. You don't have to have a title. You don't have to have some fancy name to take part and to do things and to be involved. Go ahead, Harold. Make big spiritual decisions. Spiritual growth, spiritual direction of congregations. I do think, too, I don't want to misunderstand, there are some business-related things. Elders need to make decisions about building a new building. Now, they should have input from other people, But so there are some non-spiritual things that I think they make big decisions on. Elders need to make a big decision on changing how you teach your curriculum to your children, which we did here a couple of years ago with Christian Cove. That's a big decision. There's a lot more, Harold, but some very simple things. My third point there, you're not necessarily, when you should be thinking about an elder, when you should be looking for an elder, you shouldn't necessarily be looking for somebody that's a manager of a successful business or they run a successful business. Now, that doesn't mean that those people can't make good elders, but I fear sometimes that is the very people we look for all the wrong reasons. Because again, we know they're successful. We know they could run that business. We know they're used to having employees. Well, it's a very different, again, that's a corporate mindset. That's a worldly mindset. Elders simply need to be people who can point people to Jesus. Well, Harold's absolutely right. Leaders do need to be able to look back to make sure people are following them, that the sheep haven't gotten lost. And I think, when I think of a leader, and again, I tried to use the difference in a boss and a leader. The gentleman that I was speaking of that I worked for, I worked in a supermarket growing up. In a supermarket, you have messes. People drop cans of pickles. People drop gallons of milk. People drop things, and it makes a big mess in the floor. And not just once or twice, but routinely. The owner of the store, if he looked up and I was over here and I was busy doing something and taking care of something that needed to be taken care of, and another stock boy was over here and he was busy, and he didn't come, "Hey, Chris, I know you're busy, but I need you to go get the mop and I need you to clean that up." He'd just go to the back and get the mop and clean it up. When we would do our routine cleaning at the end of the day, every night, when I first started, he didn't tell me, "Chris, you go get a mop and you go get a bucket and you do this." He showed me with a mop in his hand. So, yeah, leaders need to be able to look back, make sure people are following them. But from my perspective, leaders need to be in amongst them. Leaders need to be in amongst the sheep, so to speak. Leaders or elders or shepherds, again, I've probably used those two terms interchangeably. They guide. They're not supposed to boss people around. I'm probably, in my life, I've probably been too bossy at times. I hope that I'm not too bossy here. I pray I'm not. Back to what I was saying, they're servants first. How can I ask you to be a servant if you don't see me being a servant every day? I got to watch over the flock. Provide care and visit when time allows. Maybe I shouldn't have even put that caveat there at the end. Many times our elders have jobs and don't have unlimited time, but providing care and visiting our people should be very important. They should pray with people in need. They should check up on people. Put it in simple terms, they should care. We talked about a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to be rolling out a plan with our ministry team and with our elders where we meet with families and we talk with families so we can do some of these very things, so we can sit down and pray with you. Everything may be going great in your life. We need to sit down and pray and thank God for that. Everything may be going wrong in your life. We need to sit down with you, pray to God, and ask for his help with that. If our flock doesn't know we care, then we're not doing our job. And so we're working on that. We're going to do some of these things better. When I coached years ago, a good friend of mine at the time was the high school boys basketball coach, and of course I coached softball, coached girls. And we used to kind of jokingly go back and forth all the time. He's like, I don't know how in the world you can coach teenage girls. Teenage girls would drive me crazy. And my response would be, I don't know how in the world you can coach teenage boys. I'd kill them or they'd kill me. I figured out very early, coaching teenage girls, they didn't care one bit what I knew. They just wanted to know that I cared. And once they knew that I cared, I could get a whole lot out of them. Needs to be the same way with elders. Shepherds, or the sheep, need to know that their shepherds care. For a second. You know, we're not perfect. Terry and I were talking this morning. We were talking about Genesis chapters 12 and 13, and maybe even a little bit in the 14, Abraham. And, you know, Abraham's, again, I'm a sports guy. I use the term. Abraham's in the Hall of Fame. Abraham's talked about in the halls of faith, the heroes of faith. Abraham was a righteous man and a man of God. Terry and I were talking about this morning about mistakes that he made, things he could have done better, done differently in Genesis 12 and 13. Elders aren't perfect either, and sometimes we spend time on things that really should be handled by a deacon or maybe a minister or maybe even just a member. Sometimes we spend time on things like what color carpet we're going to put down. That's not what the elders ought to be spending time on. They shouldn't be picking out the color of the carpet. Barry will smile when I say this. Elders shouldn't be trying to decide whether you're going to get pizza on Sunday night after services or not. That's not what the elder's job is. Sometimes we mess that up, though. We got another 15, maybe 20 minutes here. So let's go through. Again, most of my life I've heard the term qualifications. I really prefer to say qualities. At the end of the day, it means one and the same. But let's go through the qualities of an elder. And I want to be clear, the reason I'm not a huge fan of the word qualification, I think it sounds too much like we're checking boxes again. And again, Christianity is not about checking boxes. But I'm going to read 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. I'm going to go ahead as well and read Titus 1, 5 through 9, because again, these are the two big passages that talk about these qualities of an elder. Titus 1, 5 through 9. This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, and his children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it. So 2 different times, Paul, he's writing to Timothy and he writes to Titus, and while they are not worded exactly the same message was sent. So what are the qualities of an elder? I'm having a hard time with that. Spiritual maturity is a must. Paul says they can't be a recent convert. They can't be a novice. They've got to be apt to teach or able to teach, again, depending on which version you read. They got to have a firm grasp of the word. Why do you think that spiritual maturity is a must? Why should they not be a recent convert or a novice, depending on which of these two you look at? If they're a fairly new Christian, I think you have the danger of them being appointed to this office, and again, we'll use that term. And I think it leads right into the very things, the bad side of what we talked about with the word aspire. You can become puffed up. You can become kind of full of yourself. We talked a little bit Wednesday night about pride. I think you can become prideful. As we get older, now Paul specifically is talking about spiritual maturity, but it's much more likely that a 50-year-old is going to have spiritual maturity than it is a 20-year-old. So the reality of this is, while it's not specifically mentioned, there's some age involved in this. There's some seasoning involved in this. As you get older, hopefully we've seen a few things. Hopefully we've handled a few situations, conflict, people that disagree with one another. Again, I think the whole point there is people that have some wisdom about them. I like the word seasoning. People that have a firm grasp of the word. There's a good mix in here. There's people in here that are older than me, and there are people in here that are younger than me. But who feels like they have a firm grasp of the word? You don't have to raise your hand. Gary, go ahead. No. We're going to get to part of that point in a minute, Gary, but I do think that's a good point. I guess the first thing I would say about what you said, are you saying that maybe some of us did things we shouldn't have done before we became Christians? Maybe you don't have to raise your hand, but I did. So, yeah, your point is, and we'll get into that with character counts some here in a minute, but you need some time from the point of conversion, for lack of a better term. You need things to be further in your past. I think that's a really good point, Harold. Almost by extension, we know that an elder's got to be married. We know that they have to have children, or at least that's what Scripture says. So almost by definition, they're not going to be a 25-year-old. They're probably not going to be a 30-year-old. Doing basic math, you get married at 25, or you have children at 25. They'd be 15 years old when you're 40. They could be believers at that point. So yeah, realistically, we're talking about people probably 40 plus. And again, I'm not saying somebody 35 couldn't be an elder, but I just think mathematically you're getting into some problems there. And I appreciate all your points. Please interrupt me. I want involvement. But the point I was making, with a firm grasp of the Word, I struggle with that a little. The question I was going to ask, and I don't want to show of hands, who in here thinks they have a firm grasp of the Word? I'm 56, almost 57, and I read and study and learn more every day. So sometimes I struggle to say that I have a firm grasp of the Word. I learn more and more every day. So they got to be spiritually mature. Character counts, going into some of the things that Gary said. They've got to be above reproach. They've got to be respectable. They've got to set a good example. They've got to be well thought of by outsiders. A good reputation. We'll talk about that one in a second. Self-controlled, sensible, temperate, not a drunkard, not a lover of money. They don't need to be greedy. They need to be a lover of good. Well thought of by outsiders. Above reproach is a term that's used sometimes. That's probably a pretty hard hurdle to climb or go over. But why should elders be well thought of by outsiders? Yeah, I think a very simple way that I would answer this is, go back to Richard's sermon last Sunday, the Sermon on the Mount. Christ said we've got to be a light and we've got to be set upon a hill so people can see. We want people to see our light. We want people to see Christ, to see God in us. If we're doing things that non-Christians see that make them kind of look sideways, well, maybe we're not representing Christ and God the way we ought to be. If you're a landlord and you're an elder, the people that rent from you ought to be able to see that. The people that rent from you should probably have a good opinion of you. If they don't, or is there something we need to do a little better? Not a drunkard. They got to be in control, temperate, sensible, all these things, self-control. They got to be in control. Not a lover of money, and I put greedy there in parentheses. I fear that we have a negative opinion and we put a negative connotation on money, and I promise I'm not turning into one of the prosperity gospel preachers that the quote unquote preachers that you see on TV sometimes. But there's nothing wrong with having money. There's nothing wrong with working and making money. We don't need to be greedy. When I was growing up, one of the verses that I feel was very misquoted a lot of times, money is not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. So if we're greedy and we're putting that first above everything else, then that's a problem. It's okay to have nice house. It's okay to provide for your family. Hopefully, if you're in that situation, it's okay to contribute a lot of money, donate a lot of money to the church. In and of itself, there's nothing wrong with money. It's what we do with it and what we have it. Qualities of an elder, we've got to consider his family. Again, both passages make it clear they've got to be married. Paul says a husband of one wife. We're not going to spend 30 minutes or an hour on this, but I will simply say back then there were cultures back there that were polygamist, that had multiple wives, it's very clear to me here that Paul's saying one wife, not 3, 4, 5. They got to be hospitable. They got to keep their children submissive. Their children need to be believers. I feel, and I don't like using that word, I believe the intent is clear here that that's children that are under their household, under their control. That does not apply to adult children that no longer live with them. Now, I'm not saying you're wrong if you disagree with me. I'm not saying that at all. Some people believe that it's any and all children up to adult children. Again, I'm okay that people believe that. If you strongly believe that, I'd love to talk to you about it sometime. But they got to have a firm grasp of their household. You know, he says to Timothy there, you know, if he can't manage his own household well, how can he manage God's church? So they've got to have control of their household. I just put this under a team player. Again, I have too many sports metaphors, I guess, in my lessons, but they're not violent. Gentle people, meek, not quarrelsome, not arrogant, humble, not quick-tempered. All of that kind of falls under discipline. Hopefully not now, but in my life, when I was young, I had a horrible temper. I had a temper that I had very little control of. We have things in our family that we laugh about now, but there were a couple of different opportunities when I was younger that had the wrong thing happened, I'd probably hurt my sister bad because I lost control and I was too mad. And again, not going into huge detail, but I threw a hammer at her once. Fortunately, I missed. Do you think that would have hurt her? I chased her with a stick of wood once. If I'd have caught her, I'd have hit her. That'd probably hurt her. I had a bad temper. Brad sitting back there smiling. Brad probably saw a little bit of my temper when we were coaching together 15 or so years ago, but I hope that's changed. I hope that's changed. You can't have a temper. You got to be in control. You quarrelsome, argumentative. Again, I'm hitting on my stuff here too much. I've been way too argumentative in my life. Again, you got to be able to get along with people. So we're getting ready to finish up here. Just a couple of other points. Yes, sir. Okay. What I was reading out of was ESV, Robert. Mm-hmm. Correct. So Robert's question is, Paul does go on in Timothy to talk about the qualities of a deacon as well, and in the qualities of an elder says in the King James Version says not given to wine, and then under the qualities for deacon it says not given to much wine. And why is there a difference? I'm going to give my 2-minute answer to that, Robert, when we could spend multiple classes on that. At the end of the day, and I'm going to go back a slide, whether it's a deacon or an elder, or whether you're just a Christian, we have to be in control. We can't be out of control, and the best way to make sure that we don't lose control to alcohol is not to drink. Now, I want to be careful with what I said there. I didn't say it was a sin to drink. I said the Bible's very clear that we're supposed to be in control. And the best way to make sure that you don't let alcohol take control of your life is to not drink. But, Robert, why for one it says not given to drink and why one it says not given to much drink, I can't specifically answer that. I can tell you again, both of them intend for us that we have got to stay in control. We can't let alcohol, we can't let marijuana, we can't let any illegal drug, or we can't let any legal drug affect us in such a way that we lose control, that we lose our inhibitions, that we become more likely to make a decision that we wouldn't make otherwise not for the good. Well, it absolutely, no Christian should be a drunkard, because again, at that point, you've lost control, and I don't have a list here, but we could go through list 1 Corinthians 6. There's a long list of things that we shouldn't do, and being a drunkard's one of those. There's some other places as well. Harold, I'm sorry.
One thing I do know is the fruit of the Spirit, and he left that long list of the fruit of the Spirit. He said, in such things there is no law. You can do all the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. You can do all that you want. A lot of times, when we start splitting hairs about is this too much or is this a little, it's usually because we're trying, and not all the time, but usually because I'm trying to justify what I want.
I think you're 100% right, Harold. We end up, when we start talking about some things like drinking or not drinking, we try to justify what we're doing. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not condemning anybody in what they do. I'm telling you, anything you do, any decision you make sure you don't get to the point that you're drunk. Make sure you don't get to the point that you lose control. And again, personally for me, the best way to do that is I don't drink at all. I didn't intend to spend that time specifically, but there's questions like that come from these lists. And again, I just said it, I don't like lists. They're qualities of an elder. I don't like lists. I'm just going to sum it up here. We're out of time. At the end of the day, shepherds, elders, overseers, whatever word you want to use, should care for, love, pray for, and lead the flock. We shouldn't be looking for business leaders, or just business leaders. We shouldn't be looking for people that are powerful or influential positions. We should simply be looking for people who are filled with God's Spirit to be elders. Because if they're filled with God's Spirit, they're going to check off all these qualities. If they're filled with God's Spirit, they're probably going to be good spiritual leaders. It's about time. Any other thoughts or questions? I appreciate everybody's thoughts. Again, Lynn does a great job. Lynn will be back next Sunday, so you'll have a good lesson again. If there aren't any, who has closing prayer? Tommy?